The Villisca Axe Murders. A night of unspeakable horror on a warm Sunday evening in June 1912. The small town of Villisca, Iowa, seemed peaceful and innocent. The Moore family, Josiah, his wife Sarah, and their 4 young children, Herman 11, Catherine 10, Boyd 7, and Paul 5 had just attended a children's program at the Presbyterian Church. The children were excited because 2 friends, Lena Stillinger 12, and her younger sister Anna May 8, were staying over for the night. What happened next would become one of the most horrifying unsolved murders in American history. The night of terror. The family returned home around 9:45 p.m. The children were giddy with excitement about the sleepover. Sarah probably tucked him into bed, and Josiah locked the doors, believing his family was safe. But something evil was waiting in the darkness. Around midnight, an unknown intruder entered the Moore home. There were no signs of forced entry. Some believe he had been hiding in the house since before the family returned, waiting patiently in the shadows. The killer went to the coal shed and retrieved the family's own axe. Then, methodically, room by room, he began his massacre. The massacre. Josiah and Sarah were murdered first in their bed as they slept. The killer struck them with the blunt end of the axe, crushing their skulls with such force that their faces became unrecognizable. Moving through the house like a phantom, he entered the children's rooms. One by one, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul were bludgeoned to death. In their beds, the young Stillinger sisters suffered the same fate. 8 people, 6 of them children, were brutally murdered, their skulls crushed beyond recognition. But the horror didn't end there. After the initial murders, the killer went back through the house and used the sharp edge of the axe to mutilate the bodies further. He spent hours attacking the corpses over and over again. Then, in a chilling display of composure, he covered every mirror with cloth and placed clothing over all the windows, plunging the rooms into complete darkness. He covered the children's faces with bedsheets. After these bizarre rituals, the killer went to the kitchen and prepared himself a meal of cold beans. He sat there in the darkness, eating calmly, surrounded by the carnage he'd created. When Feeney said he cleaned his dishes, washed the axe, and propped it against the wall. Then he simply walked out into the early morning hours, disappearing forever. The discovery and mystery. The next morning, neighbor Mary Peckham noticed something was wrong. The Moore family always rose early, but the house remained quiet. When no one answered her knocks, she called Josiah's brother Ross, who entered with his key. The sight was beyond comprehension. Blood covered the walls and ceilings. All 8 members of the household were dead. Several suspects emerged over the years. Reverend George Kelly confessed but later recanted. Wealthy businessman Frank F. Jones, who had a bitter falling out with Josiah, was also suspected. But the most disturbing theory is that the killer was never identified, a drifter potentially responsible for similar axe murders across the Midwest. Legacy. To this day, no one knows who committed these murders. The case remains unsolved after more than a century. The house still stands in Villisca, Iowa, now operating as a museum. Visitors report unsettling experiences. Children's laughter in empty rooms, shadows moving across walls, and the ghostly figure of a man with an axe. The most terrifying part: the killer walked away into the darkness and was never caught.